The reason so many people are wrongly convicted is because it's eyewitness testimony. And now DNA is coming back and telling the real story.
You get into a room with a violent crime suspect, you're always going to be the smartest guy in the room. But when you get into a room with a financial criminal, you're rarely the smartest guy in the room.
Enthusiasts, welcome to Break the Case. I'm Jen Coffindaffer. I'm your host, and I have over 28 years of federal law enforcement investigative experience. I'm so glad to have you here. We're going to cuss and discuss some cases. I can't wait for you to have a take. I'm certainly going to have one. If you enjoy what you're seeing, you can hit that subscribe button. It's free. Won't cost you a thing. Today, we're going to have an incredible guest. Really, a big part of the reason I wanted to start this podcast was because I wanted to bring to you different investigators, different FBI agents, agents from other agencies to talk about their cases, the cases that they worked, how they worked them, true gumshoe detectives. And that's what we have today. This individual was a special agent with the FBI for 25 years. His area of expertise, no, it wasn't violent crime, but it was fraud. And fraud, unfortunately, can strip a person of everything they have, of their belongings, their will to live. And unfortunately, we're going to talk about a few of those cases. We're also going to explore what it's like for an FBI agent after they leave the special agent ranks and go into the area of defense work. That's what this agent did. That's what I actually do. Half of the cases that I serve as an expert on currently represents the defense. After you retire, you get to really work on exactly what you want to work on. And it's so great to be able to say, no, you know what? That case, the facts just don't fit. Please look for another expert. Or, you know what? This case, these facts completely back up the case and back up your client. So I've really enjoyed this side of it. And I think you're going to really enjoy listening to Rick Velasquez. He wrote a book. It's called Text Caught, and it's actually about a $60 million fraud case that cost really countless people their livelihood. So without further ado, it's time to don the headset, and we're going to welcome in retired special agent Rick Velasquez.
Welcome to Break the Case. Rick, I am so glad to have you here. Thanks again for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for asking.
So we are so excited to just jump right in to not only the cases you work, but I just have to start with, how did you first become an FBI agent? There's so many people in the audience that may want to be an FBI agent, or their kids want to be one. There's some interest. How did you get started?
I used to work for a department of the U.S. Treasury. It was called the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, and people better know it as bank examiners. So part of my job as a bank examiner was filing criminal referrals in banks if we saw criminal activity. I filed a criminal referral one time, and an FBI agent came out to interview me. And while we're sitting there talking about the bank fraud, I could tell that he had no clue of what I was talking about. I thought right after the interview, man, I could do that job. The next day, there was a big advertisement in the San Antonio newspaper, and it said hiring 400 agents for the Department of Justice. So I went down and applied, and about a year later, I got in.
And look at here you are today, all retired. That seems probably so long ago. Rick, I want to talk to you about once you got in. You specialized in white-collar crime and work in what we call a resident agency. Tell me about your caseload as a FBI agent in a resident agency of the FBI.
When I got out of the academy back in 1991, I was assigned to the Dallas division, and I worked in the main division for 4 years. But then I got transferred to what's called the resident agency, and it's more or less a satellite office of the main branch. And when I got there was like 6 agents. So I was still specializing in financial crimes, but you know, when you got like 6 agents in an office, you're doing everything. You're helping the drug agents, you're helping the violent crime agents. So whatever comes up, you do. And then 25 years later, that resident agency had enough agents to form 3 squads. So I was on the financial crime squad.
Tell us about your big case and the book that you wrote. Just tell us all about that, because I think a lot of people are very drawn to violent crime and, you know, the crime that you see in the news that shows all these horrific scenes. But what so many people may not realize is that financial crime can devastate a person to the point of not even wanting to live. So take us through some of those cases and some of the things you saw.
To preface this, too, since I got the opportunity to work both cases, a lot of people will ask me, what was the most challenging cases you worked? Was it violent crime or was it financial crimes? I said, you know what? It's always financial crimes. And the reason being, you get into a room with a violent crime suspect, you're always going to be the smartest guy in the room. But when you get into a room with a financial criminal who's done some pretty complex stuff, you're rarely the smartest guy in the room. So to me, it was always more challenging going through the documents, trying to connect the dots. I worked several big cases in financial crimes, but one of the most interesting ones was the one I wrote the book on. It was about a con man here in Plano, Texas, young kid. I say kid, he was 25 years old when he started the crime, but he sold investors the idea that Walt Disney was going to build a theme park in North Texas, just like Disney World or Disneyland. He ripped off investors more than $60 million. Man, at these presentations, he had all these elaborate schematics. He had Disney parks. He had Disney rides. He had hotel drawing schematics. He had retail contracts with high-end retailers like Louis Vuitton, Neiman Marcus, places like that. He had fake contracts with Southwest Airlines signed by Herb Kelleher, who used to own it, the CEO of Southwest. All this elaborate documents were being presented to these investors. We had to go through this. Myself and the assistant U.S. attorney took a couple of trips to Disney and talked to their executives, Bob Iger and Jay Rasulo, who was the second man in charge. So it was an interesting case dealing with Disney. But Disney had nothing to do with this. What we needed from Disney was, some sample documents so we could show a jury, and we were going to need either Bob Iger or Jay Rasulo to come down and testify at trial and say, no, we had no plans to build a theme park in North Texas. I thought I'd write a book about the case. The book is called Texcot, and that's one of the theme parks that he named that was going to be in Texas, and it's a spinoff from Epcot.
Tell us about some of those victims. I think for somebody who is a victim advocate, this really interests me the most. How did it affect some of these individuals financially, emotionally, in every way?
Financial crimes always impacts people, and it's sad to see people lose their life savings. Some of the people are saying, well, these victims deserved what they got. It was greed. One of the caveats to get these investors to invest, what Thomas Lucas would do in order to entice them, he would tell them that professional athletes were investing in this, which they were. There were some local professional athletes. But he also told them that he had insider information. A longtime friend who went to high school with him is what he would tell them, works at Disney, and he has this inside information. America, capitalism is kind of built on information. If you know something, you can do it. You can make some money on it. You're going to do that, okay? And the reason this was not an insider case is because it dealt with land. Now, the difference between land and stocks, if you get insider information and you manipulate the stock market by buying stocks based on that information, that's illegal. The same doesn't apply for land because land's not going to move the market one way or the other. So people were counting on this inside information. Now, getting back to your question about how it impacted victims, one of the professional athletes I talked to was a guy named John Concack. He was a All-American at SMU, a basketball player, and then he went on to play for the Atlanta Hawks. He lost everything. There's a chapter in my book on something he said, Rick, in for a penny, in for a pound. He knew he was going to continue to lose money, but he had put so much into this investment, he felt that if he didn't continue to put money in there, then he would lose the original investment. This was desperation on his part. And you could see it when you talked to him, when you interviewed him. He had gone to the FBI down in Dallas like 3 years before he came to me. He was told by an agent in Dallas that this was a civil matter and they couldn't do anything. When I got the case and I was talking to these victims, I'm thinking to myself, how could any agent tell a victim this was not criminal? There's certain things that we're taught at the academy and you go through it with all your life because it becomes a daily practice. When you get an allegation of a crime, you got to prove the elements of the crime. And the elements of the crime in this case was going to be wire fraud or mail fraud. And they're very easy to prove. You got the use of a wire. Well, we had wire transfers. You got somebody falsifying or planning a scheme. You had that because Disney was never going to build a theme park. It's very easy to get to the level of criminality. So basically, my interpretation of what they talked to the agent down in Dallas was the agent was either lazy or the agent didn't know the elements of wire fraud. John Concack, like most victims, were losing millions of dollars on this. One victim was a elderly gentleman who lost $80,000. So you and I were sitting here, well, we got $1 million losses from these investors over here, and we got one guy that lost only $80,000, okay? Doesn't seem like much. But the fact is, these other guys who lost millions, they had millions to lose. This guy cashed in bonds in his IRA after he had retired, and this was money he was going to use for his grandchildren's education. He lost everything. There were several victims who lost everything. As FBI agents, that's what we go out and try to right the wrong. We're not going to collect the money because con man, once they get the money, they're going to spend it. They're living high on the hog. They're spending money right and left. Your money is usually gone once you invest in a scam. So the only thing that we can do to help out the victims is try to put this person in jail.
You bring up two great points that I want to talk about. One is your point about walking in, or those victims walking into that FBI office and unfortunately speaking with an FBI agent who might have been ignorant about white-collar crime or lazy, as you said. I think it's just really important to point out that people in our audience don't give up. Keep going back until you get that right agent. The FBI is filled with amazing agents that are boots on the ground, street agents that fight every day, that work ridiculous hours, and that want to see justice done. But unfortunately, just like in anything, you're going to have a small number, I think it's about 10% of agents who never should have become agents. And some of them get washed out, thankfully, early. But unfortunately, some sit across from that complaint desk and others make it all the way to headquarters.
The street agents, the people who are out there knocking on doors and interviewing people, to me, they're the best in the world. The dedication is amazing. And I'll give you a little story. So one time after 9/11 happened, about 6-8 months later, a lot of schools were having what you call Heroes Day. Okay. And I got invited to one in an elementary school. And you get like a 5th grade escort to walk you around. And, there's a keynote speaker at this elementary school. So I'm sitting there and we're listening to the keynote speaker. And the little 5th grader, he tugs on my hand and he asked me a question. He goes, "Are you a hero?" And I thought about it for a second and I said, "No." I said, "But I work on a squad of heroes." And to me, that was everything because, some of the people I worked with. We're friends with the same people. I used to tell people if anything ever happened to my kids, the people on this squad, I would put them first on the front lines because, one, they were intelligent, two, they were dedicated, and they weren't going to give up until this case was resolved. And that's the kind of admiration I had for the people I worked with. As I talked to more victims, other victims went to the Dallas Division too and got the same answer. And that was very disappointing to me. Because when I got the case, I said, okay, I got millions of dollars in losses, I got professional athletes in this case, and I got Disney. All of those three make great jury appeal if you get down the road and go to trial. So that's one of the things you're considering when you're opening cases. And like you said, if you got a crime or you've been wronged by somebody, do not stop. Go back to the FBI again. And if that doesn't work, there are a lot of other federal agencies you can go to. Secret Service, IRS, and your local department. There are options for you to go to. Hopefully somebody's going to see it as you do, and they're going to take the case.
As an FBI agent, it's really your responsibility to understand the law inside and out, because how in the world can you prove a case if you don't understand the law that they might have violated? And I know I had an amazing supervisor my first almost 10 years in the Bureau who sat me down, and 2 weeks, all he would let me do is read the CFRs. That was Organized Crime Squad. So he wanted me to understand our informant rules and regulations. And then also he wanted me to understand the drug violations. 2 weeks. That's all I did, Rick, was read all of that, take notes. And then he took me in his office and proposed different scenarios. Would you get this informant? Where would you find an informant in this scenario? Do we even have a violation? And that's the thing that I think some agents either didn't have the proper supervisor or somebody they worked on the squad with to help them through that. And Rick, that's what you did in your situation. And it's really important for people to understand that that's really how it works as an agent.
Every agent is expected to know how to work every crime that we investigate. And like you said, if you don't know the elements, you don't know what questions to ask.
And Rick, let me digress back to Texcock case, because I want to talk a little bit about, you said that it was $60 million. What in the world did this guy get? We all want to see him rotting in jail after hearing about this and the victims that he hurt. Tell us about what he got, and did anybody else get charged?
I'll tell you two things on what he got. What he got on sentencing and what he got in assets, okay? $60 million. You know who profited off this case? It was not the subject or the subjects. It was the landowners up in North Texas. This kid who worked for the family's real estate company called the Lucas Real Estate Company, Harry B. Lucas Real Estate Company. They started off buying land, actual land, where they said the theme park was going to be. They would buy land around it. Why? It's because if you buy land around a potential theme park at a very low price, and then Disney comes in and says, we're going to build a theme park right here, the land you just bought is going to skyrocket. It's going to go up exponentially. Now, there's a rumor down in when Disney World was created that Walt Disney bought his first parcel of land for $80 an acre. By the time word got out and he was still trying to acquire land, he was paying $80,000 an acre. Okay? So that's what information that Disney is coming can do to price values. So it started out they bought land. But then what it turned into, and this was the big part of the fraud, they started selling options to buy land. And what the option was is we're going to lock in with the landowner. We're going to buy this many acres for this price by this date. And that date was always tied to the potential announcement that Disney was going to make to America that we're building a theme park, which would never come. So when that expiration date would approach, Lucas and the other salesmen would have to go back to the investors and say, okay, we got to renew the contract and it's going to cost this much more money. All that money was going to the landowners. The landowners didn't know why Harry B. Lucas was buying the property. So, obviously they're not going to get charged. They're just making a buck. Yeah, I'll sell you this land. It became a cash cow for the landowners up there. What the Lucases did get, they got a few $1 million out of this. Thomas Lucas himself, he took this one trip to London and took a friend with him, and they're living in every high hotel that they can come across. I got a picture that we presented at trial. One of the first things he bought when he landed, he goes into a Louis Vuitton store and spends $4,000 on a scarf. And it's in a photo that we showed. So he was living high on the hog with the money he got, but it wasn't all that much. We looked at his Uncle Bo, who was 50% owner of the real estate company, and his father, who was 50% owner. We did not charge his father because his father was not making presentations to the investors. Therefore, he wasn't providing false information to reap a financial benefit. But his Uncle Bo was making presentations. He was lying, and he knew what was going on. So we were going to charge him. But he ended up getting stage 4 cancer during the investigation, and he died before trial. So we did not indict or prosecute him. After Uncle Bo died, we prosecuted Lucas. We went to trial. It was a week-long trial. And the jury went out and came back 40 minutes later with guilty on all charges. We provided so much information. The case was pretty much airtight by the time we got there. This was the only trial where we would have the gallery full of people watching, because everybody wanted to see Disney. The number 2 guy, Jay Rasulo, came down and testified, and you would have thought it was Mickey Mouse was going to be on the stand. News was out there and everything like that. One of the things that was funny with him is when Chris Eason was the prosecutor on the case, we went to Disney to interview him. Jay Rasulo and Bob Iger are busier than the president of the U.S. They each have 3 or 4 secretaries helping them 24 hours a day. Their schedule is, all right, you got 5 minutes here. As soon as that 5 minutes is up, the meeting's over. We had to coordinate not only with the security, but then with their internal attorneys, and their internal attorneys hired external attorneys. So we had to go through a bunch of attorneys before we could even schedule a meeting. Well, they scheduled us the meeting. We fly out there 3 hours. We sit down and wait in a waiting room for like 30 minutes. And then they come out and say, Jay's ready for you. We walk back, and the attorney sitting in there with us goes, okay, y'all got 5 minutes. And Chris Eason goes, hey, this is going to take a little longer than 5 minutes. We flew 3 hours out here. We're going to get what we need, or Agent Velasquez is going to pull that subpoena out of his pocket. He's going to give it to Jay, and we can do this all in Sherman, Texas. Great bluff. And they say, well, fine, produce the subpoena. I think we would have been sitting there twiddling our thumbs. Anyway, Jay Rouleau, we did probably a 2-hour interview with him. Bob Iger was funny because he would be calling in, Jay, are you ready for our meeting? Are you ready for our meeting? And he goes, no, Bob, I'm going to be a while. It was kind of funny on that level. But Jay was the nicest man. He did a tremendous job during our interviews, and he did an outstanding job on the stand. Probably one of the best witnesses I've ever seen at a trial.
I wanted to talk to you really quickly about that interface between the prosecutor and the agent. I can say some of my best experiences ever as an FBI agent were with the prosecutors, sitting right next to them, going over that evidence, working in harmony with them on cases. And that's how you get cases done, where they know you, they like you. You don't even make an appointment. I had an office at the U.S. Attorney's Office because I was there so much. And I know you shared that same kind of relationship. I think our audience may not understand or think that they're two separate entities and that they fight with one another. But how does it really work behind the scenes, like in your Texcott case?
Yeah, I'm going to tell you my experience, and then I'll give you a little story about what went on during this case, too. Like you, I had a great relationship with the prosecutors, okay? I mean, I would go over there once a week. I mean, you're talking an entire career. I would go over there at least once a week and just say hello. Some of the agents on our squad would say, Rick, how do you get your cases prosecuted so quick? And I said, because you got a good relationship with them. I go over there, I say hello. You guys only go over when you want something. Okay, it's a big difference. So when a police officer gets a case, he's going to work it up to a probable cause. They're going to go out and make an arrest, and they're going to turn it over to the district attorney's office. And then the district attorney's investigator is going to work the rest of the case. Well, in the FBI, as you know, we work the case as we see fit. We don't take instructions from the prosecutor. We take recommendations, but it's our baby. We work it from cradle to grave. And what I mean by that is from that initial complaint, you're going to work the case. And when it's ready to be presented, you're going to present it to one of your assistant U.S. attorneys. And then, like you said, after that, the work starts. You need to be available every time that prosecutor needs something. Why? Because he knows what he needs for trial. And if you haven't done it in your initial investigation, you're going to do it sitting there side by side with him. And then when we get to trial, you're actually at the prosecutor's table helping them. They're going to cross-examine or question a witness on direct. And after they finish, they're going to ask for a moment from the judge. They're going to come back to you and say, is there anything else I need to ask? That's confidence. When they do that to an agent, they rely on what that agent has done. They have confidence in his decision making. That doesn't happen with everyone. But I think with us, it did happen. You know that case frontwards and backwards. Well, I was working one of the cases up there, and that prosecutor says, Rick, I'm having a problem with a couple of agents down in Dallas. And I said, so what's the problem? He goes, they don't want to do what I'm asking them to do. Every time I ask them for something, they say, well, I gave you a binder. It's in the binder. Look for it. These agents would tell the prosecutor, I don't work after 5 or I don't work on the weekends. I told the prosecutor, I said, you know what I'd do? I'd go to their supervisor. And if that doesn't work, I'd go to the assistant special agent in charge and talk to them about it. Well, he didn't want to do that. He didn't want to rock the boat. About 3 weeks later, I get a call from the supervisor of these 2 agents. And he says, Rick, I know you got good rapport up there in the Eastern District of Texas with the prosecutors. How do we get cases done? And I was very direct to the supervisor. I said, I'm going to tell you, you get cases done by doing what the prosecutor asks you to do. And you work until you get that done. If it's after hours, you do it. If it's on the weekends, you do it. Now, I understand your 2 agents don't want to do that. So what your 2 agents need to do is shut their mouth and listen to what the prosecutor is saying. Now, I didn't know at the time but I hear the two agents in the background. The supervisor goes, Rick, I thank you for being direct. That's all I got. But that's the kind of relationship you got to have. And I think my whole career, the prosecutors over at the Eastern District of Texas knew that.
All right, Rick, I want to take you now to a case that you know about and talk about what happened. It was concerning a professional athlete.
So we had a drug task force. It was run by the FBI. And then there were several local officers from different departments in our area up here in North Texas. And one evening, about 5:30 or 6, I'm in the office and I get a call. And it's from the FBI agent saying, Rick, we need a search kit out at this address. We just arrested a professional athlete. And I said, all right. I grab the search kit and I go out to the address and I walk in there. And on the table, it's cocaine sitting on the table and some weed. Okay, so I start taking pictures. And I asked the officers around there and I said, is this where this was found? So I can document it on the photo log. And they go, no, we found it at the top of this cabinet up here in the kitchen. So when they said that, I started thinking, I go, okay, do you guys have a search warrant? And they go, no. This is a search incident to an arrest. So what this means for your audience is when we breach a door and we go in and grab the subject may be sitting there right at the front door in the living area. We grab him, we put cuffs on him. We have the authority and the right to walk through that old house to clear it, to make sure there's no more bad guys in there that can hurt us. And while we're doing that, if we see any evidence, in this case drugs, sitting in plain view, we can seize that as evidence. So where can you look for other bad guys? Closets, under beds, open area, somewhere where a body can fit. You can't start going through cabinets and cupboards and drawers and things like that. In this case, one of the local officers had stood on the counter in the kitchen and found it up on the top of a cabinet. Obviously, there's not going to be anybody hiding there. Basically, what just happened is this task force conducted an illegal search. So everything found from this search is tainted and probably will be inadmissible at trial. So the way they try to rectify this is they try to go get consent to search from the person leasing the apartment, and she wouldn't give it. Well, I deliver the search kit, I take the pictures, and I leave. And later on, this guy's charged, and he's going to trial. So one of the things we do as FBI agents is prior to going to trial, the agent and the prosecutors will sit down and do what's called trial preparation interviews of all the witnesses you're going to bring forward. And basically, you're asking them, these are the questions I'm going to ask you on the stand, and this is what the defense is probably going to ask you. Just tell the truth. That's all you got to do. So we're doing trial preparation interviews for this particular case on the professional athlete. And I get called in there. And when I get in there, it's 3 district attorneys, because this was going to be a state case. It's the FBI agent. It's a assistant special agent in charge of the FBI, and some other guy was in there. And they start questioning me, and they go, all right, tell me what went on. And I said, well, when I got to the search, they go, well, wait a minute. This ain't a search, right? There wasn't a search conducted. This was all a search incident to arrest. And I go, no, this was a search. And they start trying to get me to back off that terminology. And they go, why do you think it's a search? So, I can be pretty much of a smart aleck at times. And I go, well, when I got a call at 5:30 or 6 telling me to bring a search kit, that's what we call a clue in our industry. And if you put me on that stand, I'm going to tell the jury this was a search. And then I said, not only that, to compound problems, after the search, one of the officers is trying to get consent to search. Basically, what they were probably about to do was back time it to give permission to have search so they could seize the cocaine and marijuana. I told them the name of the police officer who was trying to do that, and apparently he didn't have a very good reputation with the DAs, because when I mentioned his name, they did not even know he was out on the search. And their eyes got big. They whispered something to each other, and then I got dismissed. Well, the next day, charges are dropped against this professional athlete, and he didn't go to jail. It's big, especially with the FBI today. You got to have agents who can tell somebody above them that what they're doing is not only not right, but it's illegal. If you don't have the integrity to do that, then you probably shouldn't be carrying a badge.
100%. And just to make it a little bit clearer to the audience, when you come into these residences, there's a lot of different agents and officers, and you disperse immediately, just so the audience doesn't think, oh, you arrest this person and then you go to the other rooms and search. No, as you come in, you filter, and that's why it's a safety issue. You want to make sure that you clear all these rooms so nobody comes up behind you and shoots you while you're handcuffing somebody. So that's why you have to search incident to and arrest the areas where somebody could be a threat to you. And the bottom line is, as you said, if you can't find a body there, you can't be looking there. And it's just so important. You know, a lot of people think the fact that this person had cocaine, had illegal substances, no matter what, they needed to get to that without following the law. And once that gets blurred, you have nothing left. This very seldom, I think, ever happens when multiple people are involved, because typically someone like Rick or someone else will stand up and say, you can't do this. And I know in the situations I was in, typically every time something happened like that, where you walked in and either you could smell it or whatever, everything stops right there. You say, okay, everybody, out, we're getting a search warrant. And you have somebody write up that probable cause just based on the scent you smell, or based on maybe paraphernalia you see or powder you see on a ledge or something. Sadly, unfortunately, though, circumstances do happen like Rick talked about, but I think it is rare.
After I retired from the FBI, I started my own private investigation and consulting business. And I get constantly asked, not only by law enforcement, but by just Joe citizen, how can somebody who worked for the FBI for 25 years, who put bad guys in jail, now start defending them? And my response is always the same. I'm not defending a bad guy. He's not a bad guy until you convict him. An indictment doesn't make him bad. But two, what I just explained to you on this professional athlete, that kind of stuff happens more than we know. And one of the reasons I get hired is because I can read a police report and I can tell you if something makes sense and doesn't make sense. And if it doesn't make sense, there is a chance that maybe it didn't happen the way the officer put it down on paper. Now, that's not always the case, but there is a chance. So we constantly see in the newspaper somebody who got accused of rape, been in jail 30 or 40 years, and then DNA exonerates him. And he gets left out because he did not commit the rape. And what you find out later is maybe a police officer or maybe the prosecutor withheld vital information that would have shown he didn't do the rape. Now, we call that in our world exculpatory information. That is a law that you got to turn that over. But here's the deal. If they don't turn it over, nothing happens to them. Maybe they get a slap on the wrist. And I've always said, even when I was an agent, until you start prosecuting prosecutors and law enforcement for not turning over that Brady material, nothing's ever going to change. The law is always going to be skewed on the side of the prosecution. And in cases of people who get convicted for a crime they didn't commit and then they get let go, how do you restore that life back to them? You can't. And that's how I can do what I do. So basically what I do now is the same thing I did as an agent. Okay, it's just used by the other side. And what I mean by that is you go out, you conduct interviews, you write truthful statements on what we call 302s, and you turn them over to the prosecutors or the defense attorney. There's nothing different. When we were agents, obviously investigation definition is the search for the truth. That's all we want. We search for the truth, and then we let the attorneys make the decision on whether to move forward or not.
Yeah, no, exactly right, Rick. And actually, in your intro, I did talk about just that and how an agent can go, and I don't want to say to the other side because you're always on the side of truth, but basically to defending, in some cases, the rights of individuals who have been mistreated, who have been falsely convicted, and how important that is right now. I know I do expert witness work, you do the investigative side, but it's so wonderful now to be able to have these cases come before us, look at them and say, listen, I'm not getting anywhere near this because this isn't the facts, or I can defend this client because there's a lot rotten with what I'm reading here. Mm-hmm. And Rick, I wanted to talk about that a little bit in terms of, we know that people talk about the words direct evidence versus circumstantial evidence. And I'm always trying to say a circumstantial case oftentimes is the strongest case. If you look outside, you didn't see any snow on your lawn, you get up the next day and your lawn is full of snow. You didn't have to see it coming down to know it snowed. That is the analogy I always like to use for circumstantial. The reason so many people are wrongly convicted of things like sexual assault, burglaries, other things, is because it's eyewitness testimony. And they're seeing something in a flash. It's a very high stress situation they're in, and they just make the wrong ID. And now DNA is coming back and telling the real story. So I think it's really important to point out to people that no, direct evidence does not mean the best evidence. Have you seen in your work now, that's in large part for the defense side of things, that this was the case?
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen it on several cases. This is kind of what makes me, at least, feel good about some of the work I do. Some people are getting accused of stuff, and you go out there and do more work than the law enforcement officer did, and you find out the truth of the case. So there was an ex-Marine. This guy gets out of the military, and he's looking for work. So in order to pay his bills, he starts substitute teaching, and it's at an elementary school. He gets arrested for physically abusing a second grader. I don't generally take cases where there is injury to a child, but I'm reading the police report, and I'm saying, okay, this officer did zero investigation. He came out and he arrested the ex-Marine. So I'm sitting there talking to the attorney. The attorney's talking to me about the case, and he said he wanted one interview done. And as I'm reading the report, I said, let me do 3 interviews because there's 3 people here that we should talk to. So I went out and did 3 interviews. And what it turned out is there were witnesses that saw what was happening. And he didn't abuse the kid. What he did was grab the kid's arm and pull her off of beating another little kid up. Okay? But she went home and told her mom that he physically abused her. So the 3 teachers that I talked to not only saw it, but they had all been teachers of this kid since the 1st grade and through some of the 2nd grade. And they knew what a problem child she was and that she had a history of beating up other kids. She was a big kid for 2nd grade. We don't profile Jennifer, but our experience is if you look at this kid, you're going to think 5th grader. I mean, that's how big she was. So all this teacher did was pull her off somebody else. She didn't like it. She told her mama, and her mom is one of these people who think my kid does nothing wrong. This guy had been indicted. The case gets dropped by the district attorney's office. It was all because an officer got the testimony of a 2nd grader, and there was a bruise on her arm. Had we gone to trial, we probably could explain that bruise was an old bruise and came from somebody else. We never had to get that far because I think the district attorney saw the holes in this case and said, look, we're not going to move forward, drop the charges. So that does make you feel good. But getting back to circumstantial evidence, there's a bruise on her arm. We got an allegation this guy did it. Nobody saw him put that bruise on her arm. Nobody saw him physically abuse this kid. In fact, 3 teachers saw the opposite.
I appreciate you bringing that up because I think, Rick, in the FBI, there is no more of a rewarding profession, job, career than being an FBI agent. I can't think of one. And I also think that that's because you get to see justice served. You get to be a part of doing something that's right. And I think the opposite of that is just what you're doing right now, which is righting some wrongs, which is investigating cases that weren't thoroughly investigated and righting those wrongs. Rick, I want to thank you for your service. I want to thank you for what you're doing now, because as you said, there is sometimes a stigma in law enforcement. Oh, I'm never going to go to the other side. But I think for those who are of a just heart, there is no other side. There's only the right side.
That's correct. But thank you for having me, too, son.
Thank you so much for joining in to Break the Case. And until next time, may justice be served.